This podcast episode is brought to you by Coors Light. These days, everything is go, go, go. It's nonstop hustle all the time. Work, friends, family, expect you to be on 24/7. Well, sometimes you just need to reach for a Coors Light because it's made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's as crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. It is literally made to chill. Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that's made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
This week on the timeline, it's been a quarter of the season, and we rate how they've done with Tim Tompkins and Kellan Olson. We are about 1/4 of the way through the season, and we're bringing you our very first quarterly report. We got a few guests on. Sam Cooper, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Mike. Excited for our first quarterly report with a couple of guys who have been doing this for a much longer time than we have, so should be fun to pick their brain.
Yeah, we got a lot to get to. So also joining us for this roundtable, two Suns podcasting legends. First, the host of the Empire of the Suns podcast and a writer for ArizonaSports.com, Kellan Olson. Kellan, how are you doing?
What's up, man? Don't give me that kind of title. I hate pressure like that. Because now people who don't know me are like, oh, man, this guy's sick. I've never heard of him before. And then they're going to hear me and just be like, oh, God.
It's too late. You're a legend now. And the next guest here, a guest who I've actually was telling Tim, he's been on basically all of the last 10 episodes of our podcast, but never an official guest, the host of the Solar Panel, a Phoenix Suns podcast, Tim Tompkins. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Mike and Sam, and I just got to say how much I appreciate being on a podcast that I don't have to edit.
I was on a roundtable podcast for the Sun Solar Panel, and I remember it was a big one. I think there was 5 people on that podcast, and I remember the whole time thinking, wow, Tim is doing a really good job right now, because it takes a lot of work to wrangle a bunch of guests. So hopefully I can live up to that. So actually, before we get started, Kellan, you're probably the person that we've had on the podcast that has had the most time around the actual Suns players, you and maybe Gerald, I would say. On our very first episode, Sam and I were talking about Dragan Bender, and we were sort of saying, I wonder what kind of music Dragan Bender listens to. What does a Dragan Bender Spotify playlist look like? And I was wondering if you had any insight to what kind of music Dragan Bender likes.
No, I don't, but it's funny being around him and just being around the players in general. You never get a sense for a player's personality when you watch them on the floor. You just assume with the way Dragan Bender plays and how passive he is, he's just a super quiet guy, but he's not overly boisterous by any means, but he's very he goofs around a lot. He just is very outgoing from what I've seen around the players, and then just walking by him in hallways and stuff, he's never one to just duck his head and stuff. He just says, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Things like that. So I haven't had a chance to be in there when his Spotify playlist is bumping, but I just know that he would defy people's expectations in terms of the type of guy he is, especially when you hear his interviews as well. He's not the greatest at that and really saying how he feels in that regard. So I think he would just, be different than people expect.
He's got that tall guy personality, I guess. There's a lot of confidence that comes with being massive, I would imagine. So, all right. The idea around this podcast is a quarterly report idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to take stock in where the Suns are at right now compared to how we felt about them before the season. So there's been a few games, as we know, 22 games. The Suns are 4-18. We had twice as many wins at this time last season, 8-14, not a great record either. The margin of victory, I think it's funny that Basketball Reference calls it a margin victory, so a net rating, essentially. We're at a negative 10.14. Last season, at the end of the season, a negative 9.37. So actually a worse margin of victory so far this season, so a worse net rating than the entirety of last season with what is potentially a better roster. So we're going to talk about 6 different topics and then how we felt about them before the season compared to how we feel now. So the first topic is the roster. So this is sort of a judgment on our front office, which has been a little rocky at this point. Obviously, no point guard. I did want to read, before we get into it, I wanted to read a list of point guards the Suns have been tied to in the last few months. Terry Rozier, John Wall, Spencer Dinwiddie, Tyus Jones, Milos Teodosic, Patrick Beverley, Kemba Walker, George Hill, Goran Dragic, Tyrone Wallace, Damian Lillard, Markelle Fultz, DeLon Wright, D'Angelo Russell, Corey Joseph, TJ McConnell, Jeff Teague, and Frank Ntilikina. Did I miss any of their guys?
I honestly tuned it out about halfway through.
Yeah, I think you got them all. You can count Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I guess, because reportedly from Gambo, from our side, that they were looking at him and they really wanted him in that draft, but they got Mikal instead. So there's another one, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the Godfather Gambo, he's holding on to that report. I've seen it a couple times there coming across. So let's start, actually, Kellan, let's start with you. How do you feel about the roster so far now compared to how you felt about it at the beginning of the season?
I was operating under the assumption that a point guard was going to come just because it seemed like a horrible idea not to, and it just defied any sort of really logic to come into this season without an established point guard. I thought a trade was coming. I remember, the one thing I always remember is Shams Charania had a video come out regarding Patrick Beverley. And this was about 2 to 3 weeks before training camp started. And I remember that he ended the video basically saying the Suns will sort out this point guard situation by the end of training camp. And that was really the expectation amongst that super high level of insider. And even on down to guys like us, we were obviously expecting them to add a point guard at some point. And they didn't. And I know that's what we've been talking about this whole time with this team. But that's really what it comes down to, that they didn't come into one this season. So I would say that the front office has been the biggest failure of this team as a whole, just because they're putting not only their team in a deep hole, but putting Devin Booker in the deep hole as well by forcing him to play point guard right now. And I've been on the more negative side of Point Book, just in that you can tell his scoring rhythm and things like that. His floor sense kind of takes a hit when he's playing these Point Book minutes, but he's really good at them, and it just speaks to how great he is at basketball. But you can tell that he's not fully himself out there. That's also the injuries as well, but that's because they don't have another ball handler, and that was the clear weakness of this team. And I'll give them credit for getting Jamal Crawford, because it would have been a whole lot worse without him. But with that being said, at the same time, I think that the front office, if we're going to go through everything on this team, which I believe we are, they would be the biggest negative for me so far through the first 22 games, because during the season as well, I think it's been really clear that they need a point guard. I know other teams are probably holding them out on a high price. I think they need to pay that high price at some point, because it's just going to get more ugly if they don't.
Tim, how do you feel?
I mean, not to completely echo Kellan's thoughts, but it's hard to overstate how disappointed I think everybody is that the Suns didn't acquire a point guard. I mean, just a comparison to football, it's like going in without a quarterback. It doesn't even make sense. And then you're talking about all these young players that the Suns need to develop, one of which being the number 1 overall pick in DeAndre Ayton. And one of the best ways to develop and to teach good habits to a young big is to really have a competent point guard. And to your guys' points earlier, it looked like Brian McDonough was targeting one in the draft. That didn't happen. But it's really difficult to understand how the Suns front office thought that it would be okay to go into a situation like this. The entire season with Isaiah Canaan, they figured out about 20 games in that just doesn't work, and you might as well play the young guys. But I mean, it's been disappointing just because there's been such a clear need that hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, what I think is funny, I agree with both of these guys, and I think Suns fans are starting to come to terms with the fact that maybe this team won't reach the 30 to 35 win expectation that we had going into the season, and you can see that reflect itself in the point guard conversation, where the types of point guard targets we're talking about right now are different substantially from the types that we were talking about a month ago. At the beginning of the season, Mike, it seemed like, and on the rest of the podcast as well, we were throwing out options like Patrick Beverley or Spencer Dinwiddie or Corey Joseph, guys who would come in and be a stopgap option for 1 year and just help implement Igor's system and win a few games. now you start to see names being thrown around like Frank Ntilikina and Markelle Fultz. Kellan in particular, I have to give you a shout out because you had a great article on Markelle Fultz a few days ago for Arizona Sports. So I would suggest anyone listening to go check that out still. That details some of his pros and cons. But if you make this sort of move for one of these reclamation projects, you're essentially admitting to yourself now that you're punting on this being a successful season, that this is going to be another tanking season for Phoenix, whether you like it or not, even with some players on this roster that have made strides, even with DeAndre Ayton coming in and being a consistent 15-10 guy, but that you're still a long way off from really rising up the ranks in the Western Conference.
So the actual roster: Booker, Ayton, Jackson, Ariza, Warren, Bridges, Okobo, Anderson, Holmes, Bender, Crawford, Melton, and Daniels. There's also a few other assets. The Bucks pick is kind of a meme at this point, the way people talk about that Bucks pick. Of course, we have our draft pick next year. Kellan, you did write an article about Markelle Fultz, a very good article. What would be your potential trade offer for a guy like Markelle Fultz, and for that matter, maybe even Frank Ntilikina, to try to maybe solve that point guard problem?
Thanks to you both, Mike and Sam, for the kind words on the piece. I imagine both of them being relatively cheap, and I wrote the Markelle Fultz thing in mind as him having a really cheap price because that's what it feels like it is right now. I feel like you could get him for the Bucks pick. I feel like you could get him for Trevor Ariza and fill-ins. I feel like you could get him for something around that price. And I think there's the Bucks pick meme. I like that you call it a meme because it really is at this point. It feels like if anyone's talking about fake trades, the Bucks pick is in there, and I can't tell if they're kidding or not when they always do it. But I feel like that's kind of the bar, right, of how high people are willing to go for a minimal type of trade, a protected first round pick in that light, especially with how great the Bucks look under Mike Budenholzer. I think our hope that the Bucks situation would turn sour at some point. I think the only way it really does now is Giannis has a really terrible injury, because the coaching staff under Jason Kidd, like it felt possible that they could be like a 500 team still. But now that they have someone who knows what they're doing, it isn't the case anymore. And with that in mind, it's just sort of this asset in the middle where it's not too much and not too little at the same point, because it's going to be a first round pick. So I think it's in a decent range where you can offer that for either Fultz or Ntilikina, and I think that's the right range to go in. We'll talk about Josh Jackson in a bit, but I think he's a very interesting guy in sort of that range of asset as well. But I think it's pretty clear that guys like TJ Warren and obviously like Booker, Bridges, and Ayton should just be off the market completely. But even someone like TJ Warren or anyone else on the roster or any other asset really is in that next tier they shouldn't look into for someone like that, at least for someone like Markelle Fultz or someone like Ntilikina, who's been a disappointment to this point.
Tim, how do you feel about Markelle Fultz? Do you think he would make the Suns better, and do you think it's worth giving up assets to take that risk?
Well, it depends on the asset. And one thing, too, that I don't think quite gets enough discussion is the fact that Markelle Fultz, because he was that number one overall pick, he's going to garner $10 million worth of cap space next year, and hopefully the year after that as well, as long as it works out. So there's a bit of opportunity cost lost, not to mention the class of free agent point guards that will be available this coming offseason, whether or not the Suns think that they want to acquire one of those or that they could acquire one of those. One name that sticks out to me is Ricky Rubio. But as far as Markelle Fultz, I mean, we're talking about a guy who has hardly played this season, who different teammates have expressed concern for his overall well-being, that we aren't sure whether or not it's a mental issue or whether or not it's actually a shoulder injury. And frankly, I'm not sure that the Suns organization is a solid enough atmosphere where you really want to take on a reclamation project like that. They haven't exactly been known for their consistency over the last few seasons. That I'm not sure it'll work out, but it really depends on the price tag. And you guys mentioned it before. If we're talking about the Bucks pick and Trevor Ariza, is that worth it? Probably. Josh Jackson straight up for Markelle Fultz, if they would do that. I'm not even sure that the money works out there, but that might be something to consider. But it's an interesting one just because he's such a head case, and the Suns don't necessarily need any more problems.
On our last podcast, Sam and I made the case for John Wall. Now, generally, Sam and I have sort of been against a John Wall trade, but part of the case that we made was based around the idea that it's going to be very difficult for the Suns to get a star, and John Wall is a potential all-star player that might be the cheapest an all-star player has ever been as far as giving up assets for, and would be under contract for multiple years. Now, we all know the difficulties with John Wall. It's the contract. That's the main problem with John Wall. He would have to take basically 40% of our cap space for the next 5 years, or 4 years, I should say. Kellan, I know you've written a little bit about John Wall. I know you've probably talked ad nauseum about John Wall, but with how terrible this point guard situation has been, have you wavered in that take at all, or how do you feel about John Wall at this point of the season?
I actually haven't really talked about him that much, believe it or not, because it's a conversation that goes very simply, and I just say, no, thank you, and it kind of ends there. But with that being said, I do understand the logic behind it, because some of the things I've been saying on podcasts and writing in posts the past couple of weeks is that the Suns need a fix now. They need to patch this now. They have to show a real sense of urgency acquiring a point guard in the next couple of months, in my opinion. And if there is a real opportunity to get one before the trade deadline, they need to perhaps even overpay to do so. And John Wall kind of fits that criteria, because my problem with him is that if we were 40% less sure that he was a locker room cancer, I think I would be okay with him coming in. But there's a chance that he comes in and this just doesn't even go well anyway. It turns into another Washington situation around him. And that's been the vibe around the team the past couple of years, and teams that he has led, that his leadership has been an issue. So for me, I think that's the main problem. But at the same time, you are getting an all-star caliber point guard for at least the next 2 to 3 years, I would assume. And that's really all you need until hopefully Booker, Ayton, Bridges, and whatever other young pieces you have bump themselves up a couple levels due to getting older. And by then you can kind of, I guess, take the L for his contract and hope those guys can carry you, but you're capping your ceiling. But at the same time, I do see the case for it because of the position the Suns are in, which kind of speaks to a whole as how bad it is for the Suns right now.
Yeah, I think the fact that I've been sort of talking myself into it is actually scarier than anything else to me. Tim, how do you feel about John Wall?
Well, I mean, he's a guy who has a career 19 PER, 21 points a game, a little over 9 assists as far as a career goes. I'll just ask you guys, how else are the Suns going to get a better player at that position than by trading for someone like John Wall?
Yeah, that's exactly where we're at. It's if it's sort of the conversation that we've had is, if not now, when is it going to happen? And the problem with a lot of the players that have come up in the past that the Suns could have potentially traded for is a short contract and the fear that they would not re-sign with the Suns. So we went over this with Jimmy Butler, Kawhi Leonard, and Kyrie Irving. These are the three main stars that have sort of been on the market now that the Suns have been star hunting. And the problem with all three of those were, well, what if we sign them and then they leave? We gave up actual assets for them and then they leave. Well, that's not as big of a problem with John Wall. And the real fact is, if we sign any star in free agency, they're going to be at that max level contract as well. So at a certain point, you have to weigh those options against each other and sort of make the decision. Now, to me, the conversation comes down to how good you think John Wall is and how good you think he will be going forward. And as Kellan put it, if John Wall is your best player 3 years from now, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. But if your best players are Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton and John Wall is sort of that third piece that can get them the ball, that's not as big of a problem. And that's when it comes down to his mindset and how good he thinks he is, and that might be the biggest issue that we're looking at. So the Suns didn't just remake their roster with 9 new players this offseason. They also hired an entirely new coaching staff, getting rid of the sort of interim coaches of the previous few years and replacing them with Igor Kokoshkov and his coaching staff. There's been a lot of talk in Suns fandom, Suns Twitter, Suns Reddit, Facebook, wherever you go. There are some very strong opinions on Igor Kokoshkov and what he's been doing with this team so far. Just a little bit of stats on where we're at. We're 29th in points per game. 28th in offensive efficiency, 22nd in pace, and that's actually the one that bothers me the most. Last season, we were actually 7th in fast break points, but this season we're down to 20th. And I know pace sort of sped up around the league, all around the Suns, so it's hard to stay high up in that stat as everyone gets faster and faster and faster. But it seems like we have a nice roster that could play well with some speed. We're also last in defensive efficiency. Last season, 28th. Same with offensive efficiency this season and last season. So as you can see, not great, but a lot of people think the roster was drastically improved from last season to this season. So they sort of point at the lack of improvement at the coaching staff. So Sam, let's start with you. How do you feel about Igor Kokoshkov? As we know, the schedule so far to start the season was very difficult. So how do you feel about Igor Kokoshkov right now compared to how you felt at the beginning of the season?
Well, it's very hard to look at these results, Mike, and be happy with them. That being said, Igor hasn't completely had a fair shake. I remember we were having a conversation early on in the season where the Suns at that time seemed to be getting a lot of assists. Their assist numbers were up. A higher percentage of their field goals were assisted, and we used that as a positive sign. If you look at it at this point, their assist turnover ratio as a team has gone up from basically a putrid 1.36 last year to 1.45 this year. It's maybe marginally better, but not too much of a difference. Again, all that being said, it comes down to the point guard. And when you talk about pace, I think that's really a stat that's indicative of you need to have competent point guards pushing the pace in order to find guys in their spots. Jamal Crawford's not going to do it. Devin Booker doesn't have a lot of experience doing it. Elliot Kobo and DeAnthony Melton clearly are very inexperienced point guards, so they're not going to do it either. The one thing that I maybe would give credit to Igor for, though, is that Suns fans bitch quite a lot about rotations. And so far, Igor has been very receptive to all of those ideas. I mean, as fans, we wanted Mikal Bridges starting. We have Mikal Bridges starting. We wanted TJ Warren in the starting lineup. We got that. We wanted less of Isaiah Canaan at a certain point, and we got that as well. So I think he has been fairly adaptive in making changes to the rotations. It just hasn't been met with a lot of success because this bench is so bad.
So a lot of the criticisms have sort of come with maybe those changes didn't come fast enough. So Tim, do you agree with that? Do you think that Igor should have made a lot of these roster or rotation changes sooner, or do you think that he's done a good job sort of adjusting to how these players have been playing so far?
Well, I guess if you would have asked me a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have said that he wasn't doing a very good job. But, that being said, we're 20 games into the season. To Sam's point, all of the numbers showed, at least the advanced statistics showed, that Mikal Bridges was better in the starting lineup was better with Mikal Bridges. It was better with TJ Warren in there to a certain extent. And Igor made those changes. And again, to Sam's point, we talked about how we want to see less Isaiah Canaan, and we are now seeing less Isaiah Canaan. So it's if someone gives you a pile of dog shit and then asks you to make it into something that smells or tastes delicious, there's only so much you can do, right? So it's not that I'm disappointed by Igor. I think that he did take a little bit too long to move on from certain players. Got out to Ryan Anderson during those times. I understand why he wanted to play his vets. I understand that he wants to have two ball handlers on the floor, and it made the most sense to have a point guard, even if that was Isaiah Canaan. He's been really bad at subbing out offensive and defensive lineups at end of game situations. One example would be the end of that Celtics game when he left Devin Booker and Isaiah Canaan on the floor, and of course the Suns or the Marcus Morris had that three to send it to overtime, eventually winning the game. But one stat that I do think is really telling, and where I've been most critical of Igor, because I actually like the offense a lot, especially given what they've been able to do, is the defense, how it always seems like the players are confused about when they're switching, when they're not switching. And of course, part of that is on the players themselves. You can't just give them the pass and then hate on the coaching staff. But it seems like that changes game to game, whether or not they're going to be a defense that switches or they're not going to be. They clearly don't want to switch the number 5 position if it's DeAndre Ayton. They don't seem to mind nearly as much if it's Rashawn Holmes. But the defensive rating this season for the Suns is 113.9. Can anyone else on this podcast name the last season during Suns franchise history that the defensive rating was as bad or worse than 113.9?
I'm going to guess the 80s sometime, the Walter Davis Suns.
I'm going to guess 11-12.
Kellen?
I have no guess. I'm a coward.
None. It is the worst defensive rating in the Suns franchise history.
Trick question.
Exactly.
Trick question.
Right. Told you.
That being said, though, the Suns have played the toughest strength of schedule so far in the NBA, so I do feel like that's going to go back to the mean a little bit, but that does speak to how bad the defense has been.
Yeah, defense has been really bad, and sometimes I wonder, do we need to simplify the defensive scheme a little bit to help sort of the young guys get used to it, but that doesn't work in the NBA. So, Kellan, I know you're quick to point out some terrible rotation, on Twitter at least, some terrible lineups that have been out on the floor, so I know you've got some takes on Igor. How do you feel about him so far?
I feel like he's been fine. It's really... The thing I always think about is when Ben McLemore really sucked in Sacramento and then he went to Memphis and we were like, oh, he's out of Sacramento. Maybe he doesn't suck. And it turned out he sucked. And then he went back to Sacramento. And that's not to say that Igor sucks and he's Ben McLemore, but it's really hard to get a read on guys when they're in such a terrible situation in terms of how good they are at whatever they do. And the bottom line is he came into a season with no point guard, and it has severely affected the way he does his job. And a lot of people in my mentions and in mentions across Suns Twitter cannot get that through their head and cannot get past that point because it can't be that simple. He has to be an idiot for some people. And look, he had Isaiah Canaan as his starting point guard, and he had to start a guy who's on the end of the bench or a borderline NBA player as his point guard. And not only that, play him 30 minutes. This was not a start him and then switch the lineups around later. No, he still had to have him out there like 30 minutes a night on some nights because he needed him and needed his experience out there because that's the position the front office put him in. And it sounds like I'm defending him and all that, and it's because I am. And I think that he would have had... You can see everything Tim said was spot on about just the little things here and there. And I think he's still getting better as a head coach. And I think his progress as an NBA head coach is being it's taking a hit from having to deal with this roster and grow through everything and make sure DeAndre Ayton is still staying aggressive and making sure Josh Jackson doesn't jump into the third row every 5 seconds and all these different things that he has to keep an eye on with a young team. He also has to manage a terribly flawed roster that he's starting to finally figure out in the past week or two how to make the best. And wouldn't you know it, the team is improving based off that. So I think he's been fine. And I think everything that Sam said as well was right with that he has made the changes when they've been there. Maybe it's been a little bit slower than some people would have liked, but he couldn't give up on Ryan Anderson right away. He had to be absolutely sure that Ryan Anderson wasn't his guy until he wasn't. And the same thing with Isaiah Canaan. He just had to keep going because the end result was playing someone out of position like TJ. And look, TJ's playing awesome and he deserves those minutes, but at the same time, there are certain numbers like the Suns defense and the Suns rebounding that are taking a hit because of it. And it's not like Ryan Anderson was going to help them there, but you're playing a small forward at power forward, and that's what's going to happen when you do that, even in the way today's NBA is. And losing Isaiah Canaan, you're going to have some nights when the second unit plays well, and some units there's going to be less stability without Isaiah Canaan. I know people can't believe that someone would say that out loud with the way that he played, but the bottom line is he has the most NBA experience. He has over 5 years of it, and then you're moving to a rookie second-round pick who just started playing point guard 3 or 4 years ago. So it just speaks as a whole to the roster that he has around him, but I think he's been fine.
You know, I bet Igor has heard himself compared to a lot of people over the years, 18 years as an assistant coach, Kellan, but I don't think Ben McLemore is one of them. That's probably a first for that analogy.
We should just call it the Ben McLemore rule. I think I'm just going to start using that from now on. I don't like comparing the Suns to the Kings, but yeah.
The first player I thought of was Marquise Chris, because a lot of people were like, oh, Marquise Chris, he's going to be so good in that Houston system. Turns out he sucks. He's not very good.
Saying that, Houston fans, I don't think anyone on the Suns side.
No, nobody on the Suns side. I think it was more of the Nate Duncans of the world, I think, that were sort of saying that, that it could work.
I actually think we need the opposite rule, too, where it's the PJ Tucker rule, where a guy is good on these teams that no one watches, and then once they finally go to a team that's relevant, everyone's like, I really like PJ Tucker, he's a fun little player.
We knew. We always knew. We always knew.
When he was shutting down like Carmelo Anthony one night and Anthony Davis the next, we were like, yes, he is going to be very important for a good team eventually.
Yeah. I think it was really obvious. He was really important for this team. I loved watching PJ Tucker. He made it watchable. I think a lot of games that shouldn't have been watchable were watchable because of him. So one thing about Igor, I will say, being a first-time head coach is part of the reason I think people are so quick to come down on him, because there's no history of him being a head coach that they can fall back on and say, okay, it's going to take time. Because he's a first-time guy, people are putting a lot of pressure on him at this point. These are just fans, of course. We all expect the team to be better. Everyone has rose-colored glasses before the season when it comes to fans. This roster was clearly lacking, and I don't think even a guy like Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr could have come in and got many more wins, maybe a few more wins out of this team up to this point, but not a lot. I don't think it would have made that big of a difference. One interesting stat before we move on. Last season, we were 10th in points in the paint, and this season we're 20th. You'd think with a guy like DeAndre Ayton that would have gone up. Surprisingly, it hasn't really. I think part of that has to do with fast break points going down as well. Next topic is Devin Booker. So Devin Booker, he's in his fourth season. He's 22 years old. He's a man now. I don't think we can say he's a child. He started this season as a 21-year-old. The first real season he started as someone legally able to drink alcohol. It's been a really interesting season for Devin Booker so far. He's starting to get the injury-prone tag because he's missed a few games. He's played point guard a few times this season. He's averaging 24 points, a pretty good amount, less technically than last season's, high in assists, 7 assists so far. His shooting has been dramatically affected by the hamstring injury. At least that's sort of what we can attribute it to. So that's been sort of up and down so far this season. Tim, let's start with you. Tim, how do you feel about Devin Booker's season so far?
I mean, to your point, it's hard. It's not just the quad injury. Those seem to linger. Now we're talking about a toe, but early on to begin the season, he was dealing with an injury on his finger on his shooting hand. So, he missed training camp. Then he was put into a position where he basically had to run point for a team. And that has lowered his efficiency, along with the fact that he's been a little bit slower. His shooting's off because of a missing training camp, but as well as that finger injury. He hasn't made the leap forward that he did in past seasons. But I do think that it's difficult to really judge a player when they've basically been injured the entire season and playing through it the very best they can. One thing I can say about Booker is I think that he has taken the point guard role and he's really excelled in it. I mean, we're talking about a player with a 35% usage rate, which puts him in the 97th percentile among shooting guards. So, they're obviously running their offense for him. One thing I do find interesting, and this is something we talked about in the Sun Solar panel a couple of weeks ago, is late game situations when you're talking about clutch time. So games that are within 5 points with 3 minutes remaining on the clock, that Devin Booker has an 84% usage rate, taking around 80% shots. And that's got to change. And part of that is on Devin Booker. And I think his lack of trust when it comes to his teammates. And that is something I would like to see improved when it comes to late game situations from him.
That is an insane usage rate. Pretty crazy. Kellan, I've noticed that Devin Booker seems to be taking the leadership role a lot more seriously this season. I know you've had a few conversations with him. You see it up close on the court. How do you feel about Devin Booker so far as a leader?
I feel like he's been really good, as good as he can be in these situations. After I can't remember which loss it was. Maybe the Boston loss. Might have been the Brooklyn one. Which one were they booed off the floor? Was that Brooklyn?
Brooklyn. That was Brooklyn.
I think it was Brooklyn. He was visibly upset, and just he usually after wins or after losses that are pretty bad. Everyone's kind of the same even when they talk, but he was like visibly affected by it and was pissed off, it seemed like. And it seems like he is trying his hardest to be that leader because he has to. And I feel like he is a natural leader in the sense that he does lead by example with his offense. Maybe not so much his defense some nights, although I think he has had some pretty great performances on defense this year compared to a couple of other years. But with that being said, he definitely leads by example. And I feel like we've seen it with DeAndre a lot. He's been made sure to call it the rookie when he's messed up in certain spots, and he has to be the leader of the team now. But I think he's done as well there as he could given the situation. It's kind of similar to Igor, in that regard. I just don't know what you can expect from him with what's around him and what he's being asked to do.
So there's a couple different kinds of leadership styles. So we've been very lucky to see Steve Nash for a long time. Steve Nash is more of the sort of encouraging, a lot of people talk about the amount of high fives that Steve Nash gave out in his career. They tracked him, and it was the most, as they say in the NBA. He's constantly encouraging guys, trying to keep their energy up. What we've seen a lot of so far from Devin Booker is when DeAndre Ayton makes a mistake on the floor, he's quick to call him out. And what happens with a lot of those clips, I've been a victim of this myself, people take them and put them on Twitter or put them on Reddit, and they point out Devin Booker yelling at a rookie on the floor. So, Kellan, you're up close to this. I just want to know how you feel about that. Do you think that's the right kind of leadership style to take? It's kind of the Kobe Bryant school of leadership, if you will, calling guys out in front of everyone, and maybe Phil Jackson a little bit too, and then hoping that sort of public attention to those mistakes will help them to reduce those mistakes in the future. Do you think that's the right leadership style to take with a guy like DeAndre Ayton?
It's an adjustment that they made, I think, because the Brooklyn game was when they started the comments after shoot-arounds and practices were kind of like, we're going to like start holding each other accountable, and we're going to have to change the way we communicate and just start figuring out the best ways to communicate with each other. But also, and that takes into your question with DeAndre, who's best at what sort of criticism in terms of what they take. Is this the right approach to those guys? And they talked about figuring that out. And ever since then, it's been a lot of yelling at him, or not a lot, but just there's been like 5 or 6 instances where we've seen Booker or someone else make sure to tell DeAndre when he messed up. And that seems to be what works, because I don't think they would be doing it if they didn't think that was what was best. Now, when Josh loses his mind over TJ not getting open for an inbounds pass, slams the ball down and yells at him, that seems like more of just a straight outburst than anything. But when Devin does it to DeAndre, it's just more of a in the moment, like, you got to realize how trash that was. Like, it's one of those types of things where we're not going to let this go another day to the film session tomorrow when we're going to go over it and you're going to realize how big of a mistake you just made. It's one of those things where he wants it in the moment and for him to know right away. And he looks bewildered and perplexed a lot, and that's just because DeAndre has those moments where he leaves us bewildered and perplexed, mostly on the defensive end. So I don't disapprove, I guess is the right way to say it, and I trust them to know how to communicate with each other, because it's something they specifically talked about a couple weeks ago and seem to have adjusted to.
That's good. I'm glad you had that insight, because sometimes I worry a little. DeAndre Ayton, he's got a sort of an emotional face. He kind of always looks, he's wearing his emotions on his face, so sometimes I worry about that kind of leadership style. Now, Sam, something I want you to talk about is Devin Booker's made a bit more of a defensive effort the last few games, and I think that goes hand in hand with the sort of stepping up into that leadership role. If you're going to hold guys accountable on the defensive end, you kind of have to be there as well, at least making an effort. Nobody expects him to turn into a defensive player of the year candidate, but just seeing the effort, I think, matters when you're holding other people accountable. Now, something I want you to talk about is, do you buy it? Do you think it's possible for Devin Booker to make that effort on a consistent basis for the rest of the season going forward?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely possible that he eventually accepts sort of the James Harden role that is going on in Houston. Now, I was maybe a little bit skeptical of it when he initially started playing point guard, just because, again, going back to Tim's point, the 84% usage rating in clutch situations is just insane to me, and sort of speaks to how much of an offensive load he's carrying right now. But ultimately, if this team wants to take a step forward, Devin Booker has to realize that he's not without his own faults, and his defense at times this season has been absolutely horrendous. And obviously, Eddie Johnson is a guy who would always point out that a guard's defense can look a lot worse if the big man isn't in there protecting the paint. So part of that goes to DeAndre Ayton's lack of help defense at times this season as well. But over the past few games, I do think Devin has made more of an effort. I really hope that's here to stay because they're not going to start to get better without that effort.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I hope it's the case. I've actually noticed something interesting in the last few games where they're hiding Devin Booker on whoever's in the corner. And as they run actions, the offensive team runs actions in the corner. Whoever ends up in that corner, just Devin Booker stays on him. It's almost like they're running sort of a zone defense with just Devin Booker where he only guards the guy in the corner, which I thought was really funny. It's just, you have to hide a guy like him. And it takes a lot for somebody like DeAndre Ayton to recognize it. Don't forget to call or text our Hot Take Hotline, 530-433-4368. Leave us messages like this one.
Starting to sell this team, and we need to get someone that actually legitimately cares about winning. This guy is a joke. He can suck my ass. And we're never going to be good with him as an owner. He has ruined our reputation in the league, and he continues to ruin our reputation in the league because he wants to be buddies with people that are professional athletes and thinks that they care about him. But really, he's just a fat piece of white dude with too much money and too much boredom in his life. We need a real owner, and a real owner that's going to give a about the team. This guy.
We're going to talk about the rookies. Now, this team added quite a bit of rookies, but sort of two of note, and then Elie Okobo's taking a little more of a role at this point. So I think that DeAndre Ayton has basically been as advertised. But Tim, let's start with you. Do you feel any differently about DeAndre Ayton right now than you did before the season?
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. I think that, and this is something that you guys kind of alluded to earlier in the podcast when you were talking about DeAndre Ayton pick and roll coverage. And you have to wonder how much of that is because of the guard that is also in the pick and roll along with DeAndre Ayton. But to DeAndre Ayton's defense is he has the second worst block attempt rate for any center in the NBA. He's only leading Enes Kanter in that category. Opponents are shooting 67% within 5 feet of the basket when Ayton is guarding it. So it's not good. And we didn't expect his defense to be good. So his defense is a little bit worse than I thought it was. His offense is a little bit better than I thought it was going to be. And his passing is definitely better than I thought it was going to be. So it's sort of a mixed bag. I mean, I think overall he probably gets criticized a bit too much. Something we talked about on the solar panel. You had this section of Suns fans and analysts and everybody else who perhaps thought that the Suns should have gone after Luka Doncic. And so I think that he's getting an unfair criticism because of that lingering debate on what the Suns should have done. He's been good, but there's definitely areas of improvement.
So Tim talked about a section of Suns fandom or Suns analysts that wanted the Suns to pick Luka Doncic. Kellan, you were one of those guys, right?
What, me? No, never.
How do you feel about Ayton so far?
He's been as expected for me. I actually was curious, and I went back and read the thing that I wrote before the draft that got me flamed on the internet more than I've ever been flamed before, with saying Ayton's not number one for me, and here's why. And the three main things that I highlighted in the piece were his physicality, his offensive creation, and his defense. And those are the three main weaknesses I would give him right now, watching him. Offensive creation, it's clear that he cannot face up and take a dribble or two. He either can't or he won't. I don't know which one it is, but it's one of those. As far as his physicality, I think Suns fans, it was interesting after 3 to 4 games to watch Twitter and watch the responses and people who may not have seen him over the course of like a dozen games or more and just picked up on his tendencies because they were just confused by him not showing complete aggression and complete just looking to annihilate and dominate people. Yeah, exactly. And the groans from the crowd, even at some home games, with his lack of aggression to shoot the ball at times, that was something that kind of came up here and there at Arizona, and watching that tendency come up in his physicality, especially. He's just more of a finesse guy. He just likes to lay it in more than he likes to just dunk on a guy and do the Sean Kemp thing where he knocks him over and then points at him as he runs up the floor. That's not really his game. At this point, at least, he can definitely mature and become a different player in 2 to 3 years. And then his defense, obviously, I don't think I really need to say much on that. He looks like a rookie in that regard, but he also looks like a really bad rookie in that regard. I think his defense has been not very good at all, even for a rookie big. But with that being said, and to Tim's point, I don't disagree that, hey, if you put him in a different situation, would he have looked better on a playoff team right now defensively? He probably would. Mm-hmm. He would look like a weakness for sure on that team. But with that being said, I think he would look not a little bit better, but flat out just better. And I think we have to take that into consideration as well. To take it back to the other end, I think he has been exactly what we expected in terms of production. In fact, a bit better. 17 and 10 and 3 is no joke at all, and is very legitimate. And I think the passing is the one thing to me where in the first couple of games, it was just dribble, handoff. And then we started to actually see him open up a bit and make great passes here and there. And I was like, oh yeah, this is a guy that's going to average like at least 3 assists a game for his career. He's legit in that regard. So that was my really long-winded way of saying he's been what we've been expecting. And I think what guys like Max and David over at the 7 Seconds or Less podcast have agreed with me in saying is that he was a raw center, and he got hyped up by some people on our radio station, perhaps, that he was going to be the next coming and the next Patrick Ewing, Hakeem Olajuwon, whatever it was. And the bottom line was, the bottom line was that he was going to be a lot more raw than people expected, and was just going to take time in some little areas. And when I say raw, people are like, he's averaging 17 and 10. What do you mean? Well, it's just those 3 areas I hit on, and there's just some parts of his game that are going to have to mature. And I think we've seen that. And the great thing about DeAndre Ayton is he's been pretty good for a rookie. He's been pretty great. And the best part by far is that the Suns are a pretty good team when he is on the floor. And that's really all that matters above criticism, above positives and negatives. The thing that matters the most is the Suns are a above average team when he is on the court. The net ratings and that have dipped lately, but they're good when he plays. And that's all that really matters, because the defense or the offense would kind of dip off a lot more with what I said about the negatives if that was a little less true.
Yeah, I think I agree on that. One conversation Sam and I had is and I think Dave King was on that podcast. He's the type of guy who can have a 24-12 game, and you come away from it and saying that wasn't a very good game, and that's pretty good for a rookie. As far as we're concerned, we've suffered with Josh Jackson and Dragan Bender as our top picks in the past. So with a guy like DeAndre Ayton, those criticisms, they feel kind of good. Sam, let's switch over to you here. I know we've sort of talked about DeAndre Ayton probably enough. I think you feel the same as me. But what about Bridges, Okobo? I know you guys have some hot George King takes. I'm sure you're desperate to get to. But how do you feel about the rest of the guys, Sam?
Well, obviously I love Mikal Bridges. I think it would be interesting maybe to talk a little bit about Mikal Bridges versus Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because Kellan, I was right there with you. That was the guy that I was really hoping we could somehow get going into the draft, but I knew he wouldn't be there anymore with the 16th pick. So I think these rumors are kind of interesting. Especially given that Mikal he's slumping a little bit right now. I'm still very happy with that acquisition. The one other thing I just want to touch on, though, is DeAnthony Melton is still a guy that I'm really high on for his defensive potential, clocking in with like a 6'9" wingspan. Not a guy who can create for himself on offense, but I would just like to see if we're at least going to exercise the thought in our minds of acquiring a guy like Frank Ntilikina to pair next to Booker as a defensive pairing for the future. I think it would be unwise to do something like that without first experimenting with DeAnthony Melton in some of those same lineups, because, of course, I recognize that he's a 46th overall pick and Ntilikina was a top 10 pick, but I do think there might be something there. There's potentially a diamond in the rough there that has gone to this point unexplored for the Suns. But yeah, certainly just overall, I guess Mikal Bridges has been good. Elliot Kopo, I think, has been good. And Melton has just been completely unexplored.
Yeah, in my mind, Bridges has actually been better than expected on defense and maybe a little bit worse on offense. And especially, it's an interesting moment in the season to talk about Mikal Bridges because his shooting has fallen off a little bit. We had the guy that runs the Suns Film Twitter account on our podcast, and his big criticism of Mikal Bridges is his inability to create, but not specifically to create in the way like a guy like Booker does, but more like sort of pump faking and dribbling in that single dribble pull up or that two dribble pull up mid range game shot. He says guys like that are more likely to succeed in the NBA, and that's his main criticism of Bridges. Tim, how have you felt about Mikal Bridges so far?
Well, just to piggyback off your guys' conversations a bit, Mikal Bridges hasn't made an unassisted three all season, which is mind-blowing. That being said, and to your guys' point, yes, his shooting is dipping, and if you look at overall his advanced stats when it comes to shooting and offensive rating and everything, they aren't very good. But one thing we do know is that virtually every single lineup is better with Mikal Bridges on the floor, and that counts for something, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's sometimes it's hard to quantify what a guy like Bridges does because, deflections matter, but also just sort of discouraging a guy from shooting or attacking just because a guy like Bridges is on you. It's hard to quantify that kind of thing. Kellan, how have you felt about Bridges so far?
He's been good. He's been as good as he can be because I think one of the most frustrating things and why I'm very much looking forward to the Suns being better so I don't have to write about it for an extra 4 months is the draft is extremely unpredictable once players get selected where they are. But also, I mean, there's just like Ben Simmons didn't give a crap about defense at LSU, and now he's going to be an all-defense guy a couple of years. And that part sucks too, but Jaren Jackson can get drafted to Memphis, and he's playing next to Marc Gasol, and his point guard's Mike Conley. And it's like, can you dream of a better situation for him? And it's clearly working out for him, and he's clearly like improved and all that kind of stuff. But putting a glue guy like Mikal Bridges on a 4-18 team, you're going to expect a lot of highs and a lot of lows, in my opinion. The net rating for him was great in the first 10, 15 games of the season, and that's where we really saw the case for his minutes to go up. But in the last 5 games, he's at a minus 7.7 net rating, which is about 5th or 6th on the team. So it's still up there, but not at the top where he's been pretty much all season. And he's just got to make shots because right now he is a limited player. Tim's point on the assisted threes, he's not a guy that creates offense right now. He's a guy that hits catch and shoot threes and plays really good defense for you. But if he can't hit shots, Igor Kokoschkov is going to do what he did last night, which is just call in Troy Daniels, who can hit shots because he needs at least something on the offensive end. And right now, Mikal can take a dribble and make the right play in a certain circumstance here and there, but doing it consistently is a whole nother thing, and hitting shots consistently is a whole nother thing right now. The strangest trend for him right now is that he's god-awful from the corners and awesome above the break, shooting threes right now. I don't understand what that is. I've been meaning to ask him about it the past couple of days. I just haven't had the chance to, so I'm curious to see what he says about that. But I think the main thing to watch with him the next 10, 15 games is him keeping his confidence up, because we saw it in you guys are learning how bad my brain is. Whatever game he had like 12 points in the fourth quarter and he hit all of his threes, he had that 1 3 on the left wing. See, I can remember where he was, but I can't remember what game it was. He was on the left wing. He had 2 defenders coming at him. He just shot over the closeout, and it was like, that is a professional shooter, man, right there when he made that. And that's the type of shot that he is going to have to keep taking, shooting over closeout, shooting over defenders in front of him and not hesitating. And I hope we see that from him going forward. And I think we will. I think he's a smart enough kid to realize that.
Yeah, I know the game you're talking about, and I think that shot took us from down 9 to down 6 with like 12 seconds left. So unfortunate that it's that situation that he's getting those kinds of shots and making those kinds of shots, but that's comes with being on a bad team. So, Kellan, I want to ask you this before we move on, just because you're the last person who talked here. If you had to take it back, would you rather have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander than Mikal Bridges at this point?
Oh, I'll be quick. It sucks because Gilgeous-Alexander is on the Clippers right now, and they have 14 good players, so it's hard to tell how much that helps him. But at the same point, Shai is playing with these sorts of traits and playing with the confidence as a point guard and his defense and everything, where he's just one of those guys you see after a game or two, like Luka or Jaren Jackson or even DeAndre Ayton, where you're like, oh, that kid's going to be really good. And if there was a redraft right now, I think he would move up a couple of slots. And I think especially with the point guard situation with what it is right now, yes, you'd be taking the young guy and it would take more time, but I would take Shea right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that after watching that Clippers game, and he just killed us. The conversation about it usually is it's hard to get wings. It's difficult to get wings, especially guys who can play defense and shoot. So if you can get those guys, get those guys. The other part of that conversation has always been there's so many guards. There's a ton of point guards. It's easy to get a point guard, but we've seen that that's not the case. It seems to be pretty difficult to get.
You can get a point guard. I mean, we've had Mike James. We've had Isaiah Kanan. You can get a point guard.
Yeah, I mean, a point guard, I guess, is true, but that's how you end up with guys like Isaiah Kanan, and now he's gone, too, so... But speaking of wings, we got a guy in his second season, picked number 4 in Josh Jackson. Sam, I'm going to start with you. How do you feel about Josh Jackson so far? This is going to be interesting.
I am kicking myself a little bit because I feel like I fell for the empty calorie scoring that Josh Jackson did in the back half of last season. And that's not to say that I don't think he still has potential. That's not to say that I wouldn't like to make things work between the Suns and Josh Jackson. But I did a little bit of digging. I looked into the over the past 10 years, 12 rookies played at least 1,000 minutes in their rookie season and finished with a value over replacement player of -1 or worse. Josh Jackson's was -1.1 last year. Obviously, there's no perfect advanced metric, but I just wanted to see what I would find in terms of what are the careers of the other guys who had as poor a start, at least by the advanced metrics, to their careers. And there are some really big positives in terms of other young players around the league who look really good right now. First of all, you've got De'Aaron Fox, who's absolutely killing it in Sacramento. You've got a guy like Sabonis in Indiana, and Brandon Ingram, and Zach LaVine as well. Those are just about all of the good options. Then you get to the guys like Rashad Vaughn, Isaiah Whitehead, Emmanuel Mudiay, Norris Cole, Austin Rivers, and a couple of other guys, and you start to realize that, okay, we maybe need to temper our expectations with Josh Jackson a little bit. He is very much fighting an uphill battle, and I will admit that, in examples like last night's game, he's not being put in a situation in which he can succeed. He absolutely should not be creating for himself on offense to the extent that we can avoid that. But at the same time, it's been a little bit rough watching Josh this year, and I can't lie about that.
Kellan, something Yusuf from Suns Film was talking to us about is part of the problem is with Igor, and he thinks that Igor needs to run more plays for Josh Jackson. When you have a guy like Josh Jackson, his thought is he needs the ball in his hands a little bit to be successful. Do you agree with that, or do you think that Josh Jackson's struggles are entirely on him?
I actually completely disagree. I think that he needs to be taken almost out of the offense entirely, and he just needs to be the glue guy in the corner. And yes, he's not a good shooter, so that kind of contradicts, but I think what you're going to just keep getting is him running into the wall over and over and over and over and over again, which is what he did last night when he shot 5 of 21 from the field, and I think he's going to keep doing. I'm going to give you a radio tease for what I'm about to say. I'm going to tell you why Josh Jackson reminds me of Dragan Bender. Coming up next. With Dragan, it was very, very simple. Be aggressive, stay aggressive, look to shoot, play with that type of mindset. With Josh, it's play with that same level of energy, but learn how to contain it. And until he learns how to contain it and avoid these super erratic and all over the place just mess of plays. God, there was in the fourth quarter last night, Terrence Ross just went nuts. And so Josh Jackson came out of the timeout and he was like, that's it. He's not scoring on me anymore. That's it. So Terrence Ross comes around a down screen at the top of the key and catches the ball. And Josh Jackson nearly ran to the half court line. He was closing him out so fast. And Terrence Ross just dribbled past him, handed it off to Mo Bamba, and Mo Bamba dunked it. And that's the type of play where you say, yes, he's playing all out. He's playing with the energy, but he can't corral it and he can't control himself in these moments. And he is over 100 games into his NBA career now. He's got to be past that for the type of player he was going to be out of the draft. And for now, the same thing with Dragan. I'm just going to be with my hands back and just say, like, until you learn how to really corral this and you can prove over a stretch of games you can avoid these over the top negative plays, I don't really know how you can look at him in a positive light as a player. That's really encouraging, isn't it?
No, it's true. He's been, by all metrics, one of the worst players in the NBA so far. I think it's interesting every time he's on the court, as soon as there's a play stoppage, you see Igor running up to Josh Jackson and having a conversation with him right away. I think he might drive him nuts. It's a real challenge for a coach. So, Tim, what do you feel about Josh Jackson?
Well, I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because then I'm not crazy for being the only one that's noticed that with Igor talking to Josh. I mean, to Kellan's point earlier, I'd have to disagree a little bit. Josh Jackson's 3 of 15 from the corner three, so I don't necessarily want him posting up in the corner and taking a bunch of corner threes. But to your guys' point, I mean, Josh Jackson has a 20% turnover rate, which puts him in the 0 percentile. That's according to Cleaning the Glass. A usage rate of 24.4%, which puts him in the 86th percentile, again, according to Cleaning the Glass. And you have to, at some point, corral him, take the ball out of his hands. I mean, Josh Jackson is really good when he's cutting. He does things that are really great. We can talk about how inefficient he was in that game the other night. But, you know, he did have a near triple-double, and there are certain things that he does really well, but there are other things that he does not. And I'm not sure that having the ball in his hand is necessarily how the Suns should be conducting their offense. But then again, I don't really know what else Igor can do. But I guess to your initial questions, I mean, Josh Jackson has been disappointing, and I don't think that there's anyone that can disagree. And I remember when Suns fans were all up in arms because they didn't want the Suns to trade Josh Jackson for Kyrie Irving. And that's how high his value was at that time. And look where we are a season and a half later.
Tim, at what point do you think the Suns need to maybe give up on Josh Jackson a little bit and stop playing him so much?
Well, you can't give up on him. I mean, so the issue with Josh Jackson is it becomes an opportunity cost. So if you want to trade him for anything of value, that means that you have to get his trade value up. Or if you want to keep him because you think that he can become a good player, you have to play him so that he can get some reps. I mean, you can't exactly send him down to the G League. That's just not going to work. So, you know, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, if you want to trade him, you got to play him. If you want him to get better, you got to play him. So they're kind of stuck. And also, I mean, we're talking about a team that is farther behind from the 14th seed than the 14th seed is from the first. You know, this is a team that is tanking again, whether or not they want to. So you might as well give Josh Jackson the reps. I mean, there's nothing to lose.
It's just really unfortunate that the worst bench in the NBA is not made any better by the 4th pick in the previous draft. That's kind of the conversation about Josh Jackson at this point.
But I mean, I don't want to say I called it, but I remember having this argument when the Suns were talking about drafting Josh Jackson, is that if you looked at his shot, it needed to be reworked completely. And we've seen that. Evan Sidery pointed it out on Twitter the other day. His shot is a lot more fluid. If you watch him in pregame warmups, he's shooting one-handed from the three-point line. And that's all part of improving your shot. But this is something that we talked about. We knew was going to be an issue. And now we're just seeing it unfold.
It's a hard one for Josh Jackson. It's never a fun conversation. There's some other new additions to the team that joined this offseason. Trevor Ariza, Rashawn Holmes, Ryan Anderson, those are the guys that played minutes. We'll just skip Ryan Anderson entirely. He's not playing anymore, and he's been a terrible disappointment, and we're going to have to buy him out at some point, maybe even before the end of this season. But Trevor Ariza, I actually feel like Trevor Ariza has been a little unfairly maligned by Suns fans so far. A little bit up and down. His offense is not always there. I've seen the effort on defense wane at times, but I think overall he's been a positive player. Now, Sam, what do you think about Trevor Ariza?
With all due respect, is there much point in talking about Trevor Ariza just because he's so obviously not going to be with this team next year, and we're talking about maybe including him in a Fultz trade on December 15th. So I agree with you. I think he's a little bit underrated, but still, as Tim was just saying, we're tanking whether we like it or not, and Trevor Ariza is not part of these long-term plans.
Tim, you feel the same way?
I think that with Trevor Ariza, there's two things at play here. And one is he is simply being asked to do more than he's used to being asked to do. And Trevor Ariza is a great glue guy, and that's something that's come up on the podcast a lot when we've been talking about Mikal Bridges. And so, but we're asking him to be much more than that. But I also think there's an element in his contract size that's just working against him. For example, if the Suns had given him $5 million this year as opposed to 15, I think that Suns fans would just have a completely different take on his value on the court.
That's a really interesting point. And there's guys like this, Mikal Bridges, Trevor Ariza, Rashawn Holmes, Ryan Anderson, including those guys. Picturing them with a real point guard kind of changes how you feel about them. Because a guy like Trevor Ariza, he's running pick and rolls. He's running it down on the fast break. This is not what he's used to doing. It's not what he did in Houston. He needs a point guard. It's just interesting to think about him from that perspective. So, Kellan, how do you feel about Trevor Ariza so far?
He's been slightly disappointing. 3 games into the year, it was very clear that him and Ryan Anderson were looking at each other and they didn't realize what they got themselves into. His shooting has been a little bit worse than expected, but he's picked it up. I think he's been fine some games. I think he's been bad in some other ones. It's the same point on Mikal Bridges from a guy on a 4-18 team. So, yeah, I'll keep it short on him. That's really it.
So let's end this conversation on a little bit of a positive note, and that is Rashawn Holmes. Rashawn Holmes has been really great addition to this team, an addition that really only cost us cash to get him. So he's been really active defensively, really active on the boards, and a fun player to watch offensively in that he's got one move, and that's a dunk. Actually, we've seen a few floaters from him in the last few games, which has been interesting. Kellan, Holmes, I'm guessing that we're all on the train of we need to re-sign Rashawn Holmes as a backup for DeAndre Ayton. He's a guy that sort of does everything that DeAndre Ayton doesn't. He's physical. He really gets on it as far as rim protection. But has he exceeded your expectations so far, Kellan?
Yeah, he was actually a guy, he was one of my favorite guys around the league in the past couple of years that was sort of stuck in that 10th to 15th spot on a roster on good teams where you didn't really see much of them because of where the team's status was. I was interested to see him when he moved on to another team, and sure enough, it was the Suns. But with that being said, I didn't really expect him to be this much of a game changer night in and night out because that's what he's been. He's just been a huge boost to this team whenever he plays. And I think what I see from him is just confidence. I think that he plays with a confidence, and not only the confidence, but just having the ability to not really make as many mistakes as some of the other younger players on this team will make even when they are confident. And that's because of also what he's doing. He's just doing rim runs. He's just doing rim protection. He's doing rebounding, block shots, hustle plays. So it's hard for him and it's hard for others to really screw up those plays. And it's a really basic role that he's thriving in. And I think it just makes things a whole lot simpler for everyone else on the team as well, because he's playing. So right now, DeAndre Ayton's not a guy that you look to individually post up more than 3, 4, 5 times a night. And he's mostly just been the diver on pick and rolls. And that's exactly what Rashawn Holmes does on offense as well. So it simplifies things for the other guys coming in as well. So beyond him playing well and beyond the need to bring him back next year, I think it just helps everyone else out because he plays a similar style to Ayton in terms of what his role is.
He's playing phenomenally, especially when it comes to rim protection. Tim threw out a stat earlier in this episode where he was talking about DeAndre Ayton's rim protection, and I think you said he allowed opponents to shoot, was it 67% inside of 5 or 6 feet?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at Holmes, he's allowing opponents to shoot 46.4% inside of 6 feet. That ranks second, just behind Bam Adebayo among all NBA centers. So he's been phenomenal in that respect. I hope it doesn't take too much to re-sign him, but I don't know, given how much some big men signed for this offseason, if you look at guys like Brook Lopez, Julius Randle, even Alex Len, who maybe went a couple months without offers, I'd like to think Holmes wouldn't exactly break the bank for the Suns, but he is a guy who should be appreciated for his defensive intensity.
Yeah, unfortunately, everyone has cap space in this coming year, so guys might get paid a little more than they're worth. Tim, do you have any thoughts on Rashawn Holmes and how he's been for the team so far?
Well, one thing is, if James Jones, if you are listening to this podcast, please re-sign Rashawn Holmes.
Of course he listens.
I mean, he is the perfect backup big, and I think that everyone that had seen him play in Philly knew exactly what the Suns were getting. They were all really excited. But my thing with Rashawn Holmes is I just think if you had Rashawn Holmes' mentality and ferocity on the court, but with DeAndre Ayton's size and soft touch, it would just make the perfect center. But that being said, I mean, the Suns right now are getting solid play out of the center spot for the entire game. And that's something that we haven't seen in years past. And a large part of that is because of Rashawn Holmes as well as DeAndre Ayton.
All right. Well, that's been, unfortunately, with the start that the Suns have had so far, this isn't an overly positive podcast as far as our first quarterly report. But remember, we all knew that the beginning of the season, the first quarter of the season, is very difficult, the most difficult schedule in the NBA so far, which tends to happen when you're the worst team in the NBA, of course. But we kind of knew that this first quarter of the season will be rough. We're hoping the next quarterly report after the next about 20-ish games is a little more positive, but we'll see at that point. But thank you guys so much for joining Sam and I. This has been a really fun conversation. Kellan, make sure to listen, of course, to the Empire of the Suns podcast and read everything he writes at arizonasports.com. Kellan, do you have anything specific that you'd like to plug?
No, that's pretty much everything, man. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Of course, and Tim, Suns Solar Panel. Make sure to follow, of course, these guys on Twitter as well. Both really great Twitter follows. Solar Panel is another fantastic podcast. Tim, do you have anything that you would like
as far as plugging? No, I think you already did that well enough for me, but I just want to say, Kellan, it was nice to podcast with you again. I think this is the second or third time, and Sam and Mike, thank you so much for having me on. And I'm just really appreciative, again, to not have to be the one editing this podcast, but it really is an honor to be on, so thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure to check us out next week. And, well, hopefully another great week of Suns victories, right, guys?
Oh, yeah. Only victories for us.
The small victories.
Right.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.